There's a brown bottle sitting in most people's medicine cabinets right now that could completely change the way you grow tomatoes. Not a fertilizer, not a fungicide, not some expensive garden product with a fancy label. Hydrogen peroxide. And before you click away, this is not about pouring chemicals on your plants and hoping for the best. What tomato growers have been quietly discovering about this one simple compound goes way beyond anything you'd expect. We're talking about saving plants that look completely dead, stopping diseases before they even start, giving roots an oxygen boost that changes how a tomato plant grows from the very first week. Most gardeners who use hydrogen peroxide are only using it for one or two things. But there are 9 benefits, and some of them are so counterintuitive that even experienced growers do a double take the first time they hear them. We're going to go through all 9 today, and I need you to stay with me until number 5, because that one has genuinely rescued tomato plants that were days away from being pulled out of the ground. Before we get into it, drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever used hydrogen peroxide in the garden before? And while you're at it, tell me what country you're growing from and what tomato variety you're working with this season. That section always makes for the best conversations on this channel. Now, let's talk about what hydrogen peroxide actually does in the soil. And I'll keep this short because the benefits are where things get really interesting. Hydrogen peroxide is water with 1 extra oxygen atom. When it hits the soil, it breaks down and releases that oxygen directly into the root zone. For tomatoes, which are heavy feeders with aggressive root systems, that extra oxygen makes a significant difference. Roots breathe, and when they can't breathe, everything above the soil starts to suffer. That's the foundation. Now let's build on it. Benefit number 1, seed germination acceleration. Most people don't start thinking about hydrogen peroxide until their tomato plants are already in the ground. But one of the most effective uses happens before the plant even exists. Soaking tomato seeds in a diluted hydrogen peroxide solution before planting, typically 3% hydrogen peroxide, which is the standard drugstore variety, mixed with water in a 1-to-1 ratio, does 2 important things simultaneously. First, it softens the seed coat. Tomato seeds have a natural outer layer that can slow down germination, especially in cooler soil. The peroxide helps break that barrier down gently, giving the embryo inside a faster path to the surface. Second, and this is the part most people miss, it kills surface mold, fungal spores, and bacterial contamination that might be sitting on the seed before it even goes into the soil. You're essentially sterilizing the seed before planting. The result? Growers who soak their seeds for 20 to 30 minutes in this solution report seeing germination 2 to 4 days, faster than unseeded batches from the same packet. Now, the mistake to avoid here is concentration. Do not use hydrogen peroxide at full strength on seeds. The 1-to-1 dilution with clean water is the safe zone. Anything stronger risks burning the embryo inside the seed, and you'll get nothing. And here's a quick question. If you've had tomato seeds that just refuse to germinate even when everything else seemed right, that surface contamination issue might have been the silent culprit the whole time. But seed starting is just the beginning. What happens once those seedlings are actually in the soil is where things start to get surprising. Benefit number 2, root zone. Oxygenation. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough in tomato growing. Your soil can suffocate your roots. It doesn't happen overnight. It's gradual. Compacted soil, clay-heavy mixes, pots that hold moisture too long. All of these reduce the amount of oxygen available to tomato roots. And when roots are working in low oxygen conditions, they slow down. Nutrient uptake drops. Growth stalls. The plant looks like it's struggling, even though you're watering regularly and the weather is fine. This is where a diluted hydrogen peroxide soil drench changes the situation. When you water your tomatoes with a solution of 1 teaspoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water, or scaled up to about 2 teaspoons per gallon, that extra oxygen molecule releases directly into the root zone as the solution soaks in. It's essentially giving your roots a breath of fresh air in an environment where they were slowly being starved of it. Experienced container growers especially swear by this because pots naturally compress over time and drainage can become inconsistent. A peroxide drench every 2 to 3 weeks keeps the root environment from going stagnant. What you'll notice over time is that plants treated with occasional peroxide drenches tend to show stronger stem development, darker green leaf color, and more vigorous lateral root growth when you pull them from containers. The roots look healthier, more white, more active. But wait, because what root oxygenation leads to sets up the next benefit perfectly. And this one is something that affects almost every tomato grower at some point in the season. Benefit number 3, fungal disease. Prevention tomatoes and fungal disease have a complicated relationship. Early blight, late blight, septoria leaf spot, powdery mildew. If you've grown tomatoes for more than 1 season, you've probably encountered at least one of these. And once fungal disease gets a foothold in a plant, it's significantly harder to stop than it is to prevent. Hydrogen peroxide creates a hostile environment for fungal spores. When applied as a foliar spray, diluted to roughly 1 part 3% hydrogen peroxide to 9 parts water, it essentially disrupts the cell membranes of fungal organisms on contact. Spores that haven't germinated yet are destroyed. Colonies that are just beginning to establish get interrupted before they can spread. The critical word here is prevention. This is not a treatment for a full-blown fungal infection that's already consumed half your plant. Think of it as a shield, not a cure. The timing that works best for most growers is spraying in the early morning, before the heat of the day kicks in, and focusing on the undersides of leaves, which is where most fungal spores first take hold. Once a week during humid stretches, or after extended rain, is a rhythm that keeps the pressure low. The mistake to avoid is spraying in direct afternoon sun with a stronger concentration. You can bleach your leaves. Stick to early morning and stick to the 10-to-1 dilution for foliar use. Here's a thought. Which tomato disease has done the most damage in your garden? Drop it in the comments. Because the next benefit is one that a lot of growers don't connect to hydrogen peroxide at all, and it's one that's more relevant than most people realize. Benefit number 4, soil sterilization for transplanting. When you're moving tomato seedlings from one container to another, or transplanting them from indoors into the ground or into grow bags, the soil they're going into carries risk. Even bagged potting mix from a garden center can harbor fungal spores, bacteria, and pathogens that are completely dormant until conditions warm up and moisture activates them. Reused soil from previous seasons is even higher risk. Old containers especially can hold residue from last year's diseases even after cleaning. Watering your transplant site with a diluted hydrogen peroxide solution 24 to 48 hours before planting essentially sterilizes the top layer of soil without leaving any harmful residue. The peroxide breaks down into water and oxygen within hours, leaving nothing chemical behind in the soil. Just a cleaner starting environment for your new plant. This is one of the most underused applications in the whole list. Most gardeners never think about what's living in the soil waiting for their transplants. But that pre-treatment step creates a blank slate, especially useful if you've had disease problems in a specific bed or container in previous seasons. The ratio here is the same as the drench. 2 teaspoons per gallon is a reliable standard. Some growers go slightly stronger for soil sterilization specifically, up to 1 tablespoon per gallon, as long as they're waiting at least 24 hours before putting any plant roots into that soil. Now we're about to get to number 5, and I want to say this clearly before we get there. This is the one that the most people respond to when they hear it, because it's about saving plants, not maintaining them, not optimizing them, actually rescuing them when they look completely gone. Benefit number 5. Root rot recovery. This is the one. You've seen it. Maybe you've experienced it. A tomato plant that was thriving 2 weeks ago suddenly starts wilting. Not from drought. The soil is actually wet. The lower leaves yellow and drop. The stem near the soil line starts to look wrong. Soft, discolored. You pull the plant out and the roots are brown. Some are mushy. The smell is wrong. That's root rot. And the conventional wisdom for decades has been, once it's that bad, the plant is done. Throw it out. Start over. But here is what some growers started discovering, and it fundamentally changed the way they approach overwatering recovery. Hydrogen peroxide, used correctly at this stage, can actually reverse early to moderate root rot. Here's why it works. Root rot is caused by anaerobic pathogens, organisms that thrive in oxygen-deprived, waterlogged conditions. The moment you flood that root zone with oxygenated water from a peroxide solution, you're attacking those organisms directly in their preferred environment. The oxygen kills them. The peroxide also kills the secondary bacterial infection that often accompanies root rot and accelerates the decay. The method: remove the plant carefully from its container. Rinse the root ball gently with clean water. Then soak just the roots in a solution of 1 teaspoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water for 30 minutes. You'll actually see it fizzing. That fizzing is the oxygen releasing, and it's doing exactly what you want it to do in those damaged root tissues. After soaking, trim away any roots that are fully black or completely mushy. Those cannot recover. But roots that are still partially white, or light brown with some firmness, have a chance. After trimming, replant into fresh, dry soil. Do not water heavily for 2 to 3 days. Let the root system stabilize. Growers who have used this method on plants they were about to discard report seeing new white root growth within a week in many cases. The plants still need time to recover. They may drop leaves during that period, but they come back. The mistake to avoid is waiting too long. If every single root is black and the stem has collapsed from the base, the plant is past the point of recovery. The peroxide treatment works on early to moderate root rot. If you catch it in time, and this is the key, it changes everything. This is why I wanted you to stay until number 5, because every season, gardeners lose plants to root rot that could have been saved, and most of them never knew this was an option. Take a breath, because we're not done. The remaining 4 benefits are still genuinely useful, and one of them solves a problem that drives gardeners absolutely crazy. Benefit number 6, transplant shock recovery. Even healthy transplants go through stress, moving from one environment to another, from indoor seed trays to outdoor beds, from small pots to large containers, disrupts the root system even when it's done carefully. Transplant shock looks like sudden wilting, slow growth, or a plant that just sits there doing nothing for weeks after it should have taken off. Adding a small amount of hydrogen peroxide to your transplant watering, 1 teaspoon per gallon, introduces that oxygen burst to the root zone exactly when the roots are trying to establish a new soil. It speeds up the colonization of beneficial aerobic bacteria, creates a more hospitable root environment, and reduces the stress window. Think of it as helping the roots find their footing faster. Growers who use this technique consistently report shorter recovery periods after transplanting, plants that take off within days instead of sitting stagnant for 2 to 3 weeks. Benefit number 7, overwatering recovery. This one is slightly different from root rot, and it's important to understand the distinction. Overwatering doesn't always lead to root rot immediately, but the compacted, oxygen-depleted soil that results from excessive watering creates a stressed root environment that makes the plant vulnerable to everything else on this list: disease, pests, slow growth. If you've overwatered a tomato plant and it's wilting, even though the soil is wet, that's oxygen deprivation in action. The roots are struggling, not because they're rotting yet, but because they can't breathe. A soil drench with diluted peroxide at this stage is like cracking a window in a stuffy room. It reintroduces oxygen rapidly. It helps the soil recover faster than just waiting for it to dry out on its own. And if there are early pathogenic organisms beginning to establish in those wet conditions, the peroxide disrupts them before they escalate. This is the intervention that catches root rot before it becomes root rot. Use it early, and you may never have to use the number 5 method at all. Benefit number 8, pest pressure reduction. This one surprises people the most when they hear it for the first time. Hydrogen peroxide as a pest deterrent. It doesn't work like a pesticide. It doesn't kill insects on contact the way chemical treatments do. But what it does do is make the environment around your tomatoes less hospitable to certain soft-bodied pests, particularly fungus gnats and their larvae, which live in the soil and feed on roots and organic matter. Fungus gnat larvae are a significant problem for container-grown tomatoes and seedlings. They're hard to see. They damage roots, and they thrive in moist, organic-rich soil. A peroxide soil drench kills their larvae on contact. The fizzing effect disrupts their habitat, and the oxygen concentration is lethal to them. For above-ground pests, a diluted foliar spray creates a surface environment that some common garden pests, especially spider mites in early infestation stages, find irritating and tend to avoid. This isn't a silver bullet for serious pest infestations, but as part of a broader garden hygiene routine, it adds another layer of protection without introducing anything that persists in the soil or harms beneficial organisms when properly diluted. Would you use hydrogen peroxide as part of a pest management routine? Genuinely curious. Let me know in the comments. Benefit number 9, mold prevention in containers and grow bags. The last one on this list is something every container tomato grower eventually deals with, and most people just accept it as normal. White, fuzzy mold on the surface of potting soil. It looks alarming. It's actually usually saprophytic mold, meaning it's feeding on decaying organic matter in the mix rather than attacking your plant directly. But it's a sign that moisture levels are too high, airflow is poor, and the conditions that harmless mold loves are the same conditions that harmful pathogens love. A light spray of diluted hydrogen peroxide on the soil surface, same 10-to-1 ratio used for foliar sprays, kills the visible mold within 24 to 48 hours. It breaks down the fungal colony without disrupting the deeper soil ecosystem when used at this concentration. More importantly, addressing that surface mold is addressing the conditions that created it. The peroxide treatment combined with improved drainage and spacing between containers creates an environment where that mold simply can't establish. This is one of those small wins that compounds over time. Clean soil surface, better airflow, healthier root zone, fewer disease entry points. It all connects. 9 benefits. And if you think about the way they stack, from seed starting through mold prevention, what you're really looking at is hydrogen peroxide as a full-season companion for tomato growing, rather than a single-use fix. The seed soak gets you faster germination. The oxygenation drench gives roots a healthy foundation. The fungal spray builds a disease shield. The soil sterilization cleans your starting environment. Number 5, root rot recovery saves the plants you thought were gone. Transplant and overwatering recovery catch problems before they escalate. Pest pressure reduction adds another layer of protection. And mold prevention keeps your containers clean all season. The biggest surprise in all of this, for most people, is that something this simple and this cheap is genuinely effective. 3% hydrogen peroxide from any pharmacy. A few teaspoons per gallon of water. That's the investment. The safest place to start if you're new to this is the soil drench. 2 teaspoons per gallon of water, applied once every 2 to 3 weeks instead of your regular watering. No measuring complexity, no foliar spray timing concerns. Just a simple addition to your existing watering routine. Start there, watch how your plants respond, and build from that foundation. And the most valuable use on this entire list, the one worth understanding even if you never use any of the others, is the root rot recovery method. Because at some point in your tomato growing journey, you will lose a plant to root rot. And now, you don't have to. Sometimes the most useful gardening tools aren't expensive fertilizers or fancy products. They're simple household items people completely overlook. Which hydrogen peroxide trick would you try first? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this video gave you something useful, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next on this channel. Keep growing.